This lecture provides a formal coverage of the Ricardian model of trade. As a brief warning, this lecture utilizes algebra and algebraic manipulations, as well as graphical analysis in providing an exposition of the Ricardian model. The model assumptions are as follows. We assume a simple global setting in which there are two countries, the United States and India for descriptive purposes, two goods, cloth and machines, a single homogeneous resource, labor or labor hours. Markets are assumed to be perfectly competitive. Note that the Ricardian model is premised on the labor theory of value, in that it focuses exclusively on labor as the key determinant of output in all markets. This single homogeneous factor assumption drives some of the results that follow. We shall now define an important concept, the labor unit requirement. This concept simply states how many labor hours is required to produce a unit of the good. So subscripting with AM and AC, AM is the number of hours it takes to produce one machine, and AC is the number of labor hours it takes to produce 1 yard of cloth. In what follows, I will simply distinguish India's magnitudes with an asterisk. So AM and AC, for instance, will be magnitudes for the US, and AM star and AC star will be magnitudes for India. Production possibilities for both countries are thus represented as L, the total number of labor hours available in that country, being greater than or equal to the sum of the labor hours used in producing both goods, that is, AMQM plus ACQC. Think of it this way. If L is defined as a daily number of productive labor hours and is equal to 15, then production possibilities must not exceed that, so that if I spend 8 hours producing machines, I must spend no more than 7 hours producing cloth. The 8 hours is arrived at by asking, how many hours does it take to produce a machine, which is AM, and then multiplying that by how many machines I can produce, which is QM. Going back to our notation, with production possibilities assumed to be binding for efficiency purposes, we replace the inequality with equalities for both countries, which means production occurs on their respective PPFs, that is, their production possibility frontiers. The PPF in each country is now represented by linear functions. We can rearrange each of these PPFs and obtain a linear characterization where one of the goods is described in terms of the other good. In this case, we have the quantity of cloth being described as a function of the quantity of machines. We can now go ahead and depict this characterization graphically. For the US, the PPF is depicted showing the dependent variable as the quantity of cloth and the independent variable as the quantity of machines. The intercepts are given as the ratio of the total amount of labor hours divided by the labor unit requirements used in producing that good. The slope of the PPF is given by the ratio of the labor unit requirements. While this is negative, in subsequent use we shall describe this in absolute values. Similarly, for India, the PPF is also depicted with analogous descriptions. It's important to note that the slope, as drawn, with the quantity of machines on the horizontal axis is AM over AC, which is the opportunity cost of producing a machine. If we had our linear characterization as having quantity of machines being described by the quantity of cloth, we would have had the quantity of cloth drawn on the horizontal axis, and as a result the slope would have been AC over AM, which now describes the opportunity cost of producing a yard of cloth. Our next task is to determine the production choice in both countries under autarky. I'll focus on home alone, but the same argument holds for foreign, which would simply be the same solutions but with asterisks included. So first, under perfect competition, let's note that labor will be paid a wage equal to the value of its marginal product, which is given by the unit price of the good P multiplied by the marginal product of labor, the MPL. Rearranging this gives us the real wage, W over P, which is equal to the MPL. In other words, what can be purchased from an hour of labor working is what quantity of that product that is produced from that labor hour being used to produce that good. It is intuitive then to see that the MPL in each industry is simply the inverse of the labor unit requirement in each industry. Second, for each country to produce both goods, then the homogeneous labor hour must be employed in both industries. And for that to happen, wages have to be the same across industries. Well, if they are, it then follows that from some slight algebraic manipulation that the relative price of each good is equal to the opportunity cost associated with producing it. The relative price of a machine, which is PM over PC, is equal to its opportunity cost, AM over AC. And similarly, the relative price of a yard of cloth, PC over PM, is equal to its opportunity cost, AC over AM. This, as implied earlier, also holds true for India, as described for the US. The intuition for these results is as follows. Since each country is not having any trade dealings with the other, and both goods are desired within each country, in producing efficiently, they will have to allocate their labor hours in such a way that reflects indifference as to where the labor hour is employed. That is, by paying the same hourly wage in both industries. This results in the relative price of each good being valued precisely by their opportunity costs. Now let us bring in the possibility of trade, again based on the presence of comparative advantage. In what follows, using the notation already in use, I assume that the US has an absolute advantage in both goods, but in terms of comparative advantage, it has it only for machines, whereas India has a comparative advantage in producing cloth. Make sure you understand the algebraic depictions in these slides. The assumption of comparative advantage, and hence lower opportunity cost for machine production in the US, means the relative price of machines will be lower in the US than in India. Similarly, the relative price of cloth will be lower in India than in the US. So with trade relations between the two, demand for machines in the US will increase, while demand for cloth in India will increase. Demand changes will affect prices, so that the relative price of machines will increase in the US and fall in India, while the relative price of cloth will increase in India and fall in the US. This continues until relative prices are equalized across countries. So what are the implications of these changes? Well, since in each country trade brings about an inequality between relative prices and opportunity costs which have not changed, it means that wages across the two industries have changed in each country. Specifically, wages in machine production must be higher than wages in cloth production in the US, and wages in cloth production must be higher than wages in machine production in India. As a result, labor hours specialize completely where the wage is higher and produce exclusively that good. Only machines get produced in the US and only cloth gets produced in India. We thus have complete specialization in both countries, and this is in the industries where they have comparative advantage. Now we investigate whether there are gains from trade and the resulting complete specialization of labor hours. This is found by asking what happens to real wages, which implicitly are the consumption possibilities. In the US, since only machines are produced, The marginal product of labor in machine production has not changed, so W over PM should not change. But this means that since the price of machines is increasing, then it means wages have increased by the same rate as well. So consumption possibilities for machines remains the same as before trade. However, cloth is no longer produced in the US, so W over PC is not given by the MPL anymore. However, since we know that wages have increased while the price of cloth in the US has fallen, then consumption possibilities for cloth has increased in the US than before trade. An analogous reasoning holds for India but for opposite goods. Clearly, trade makes both countries better off in terms of being no worse off in consumption possibilities for one good, but in being strictly better off in consumption possibilities for the other good. The graphical depictions of these results can be seen. First, consider the US. The PPF is as before, which is the red line, the slope of which is the opportunity cost of producing a machine. Under autarky, that is also the relative price of a machine, PM over PC, and production and consumption is under PPF. With trade, complete specialization happens with the US specializing completely in producing machines. So the consumption possibilities lines post-trade pivots out from the horizontal plane where machines are produced and becomes steeper, reflecting the fact that the relative price of machines PM over PC is now higher than the opportunity cost of machines AM over AC. Consumption beyond the PPF, which is unattainable by production under autarky, is now feasible through trade. We show an analogous graph for India as well. In India, since specialization was in cloth, the consumption possibilities frontier, the blue dotted line, pivots out from the vertical plane where cloth is produced and is flatter, reflecting the fact that the relative price of machines PM star over PC star is now lower than the opportunity cost of a machine AM star over AC star. The flip side being that the relative price of cloth is higher than its opportunity cost. So consumption beyond the PPF, previously unattainable under autarky, is now feasible as a result of trade. We summarize these results as follows. Okay, let us now look at a numerical illustration of what must have been an exhausting theoretical exposition so far. Let's suppose labor unit requirements are given in the two countries by the following magnitudes. AM is equal to 2, AC is equal to 2, AM star is equal to 5, AC star is equal to 3. With these magnitudes, the US clearly has an absolute advantage in producing machines and cloth, but a comparative advantage only in machines, as AM divided by AC is 1, but AM star divided by AC star is 1.67. And India has a comparative advantage in producing cloth, as AC star over AM star is 0.6 and AC over AM is 1. The US is assumed to have 4,000 labor hours and India 6,000 labor hours. Thus, their PPFs can be described respectively. Again, algebraically arranging the expressions we have, we can for each country express their PPFs as the quantity of cloth being determined as a linear function of the quantity of machines. The graphical depiction of this is shown for the United States, where we have solved for the intercept values as 2,000 yards of cloth and 2,000 machines. The slope of the PPF is 1, that is, the opportunity cost of a machine is 1, or precisely, the opportunity cost of a machine is a yard of cloth. For India, the graphical depiction is also shown. Again, solving for the intercept values, we have 2,000 yards of cloth and 1,200 machines. The slope of the PPF is negative 5/3 or negative 1.67. In other words, the opportunity cost of a machine is 1.67 yards of cloth. To complete the model under autarky, we introduce prices and wages. If we assume that a machine costs $60 and a yard of cloth costs $60 in the US, so the numbers are chosen in order to satisfy the autarky requirement that wages are equalized in order to produce both goods, and that the machine costs in equivalent dollars $80 in India and a yard of cloth in equivalent dollars $48 in India. Again, those numbers are chosen to satisfy the requirement that under autarky, wages are equalized in order to produce both goods in India. Then we have that in the United States, hourly wages in producing machines and cloth are $30 per hour, and in India, $16 per hour, again in equivalent dollar conversion of their currency. Why this difference in their hourly wages? So again, let's recall that the US has an absolute advantage in producing both goods. This reflects superior labor productivity in the US compared to India. Such superior labor productivity is reflected in the higher wage paid in the US. What now happens once we allow for trade? Given the prices, the dynamics are as described previously. Machine demand increases in the United States and falls in India, and cloth demand increases in India but falls in the United States. Thus, relative prices converge across the two countries. One such convergence, for instance, is say machine prices fall in India but rise in the United States to $66, while cloth prices fall in the United States but rise in India to $55. Relative prices now change and differ from their opportunity costs in both countries. The relative price of a machine is now 1.2 yards of cloth. This is higher than the opportunity cost of producing a machine in the US and lower than the opportunity cost of producing a machine in India. As a result, wages in the machine industry in the US rise to $33 per hour, while they fall in India to $13.20 per hour. Similarly, wages in the cloth industry fall in the US to $27.50 per hour and rise in India to $18.33 per hour. Since labor in each country is homogeneous, it specializes completely in the industry paying the higher wage. The gains from trade can now be seen in terms of consumption possibilities for both goods, that is, in terms of the real wage for both goods. Before trade, the real wage in the United States for machines was 0.5 machines. After trade, it is still 0.5 machines. The real wage for cloth was 0.5 yards of cloth before trade. After trade, it is 0.6 yards of cloth. So trade makes the US better off. In India, real wages for machines before trade was 0.2 machines. But after trade, it is now 0.28 machines. Real wages for cloth before trade was 0.33 yards of cloth, but after trade it is 0.33 yards of cloth as well. So trade also makes India better off. Again, we can depict these outcomes graphically by showing first, for the US, the consumption possibilities line has the higher slope of 1.2 and pivots out from the horizontal axis where machines are produced. Since the US specializes completely post-trade in producing machines. Consumption possibilities up to this line are now possible, though previously unattainable under autarky production and consumption. Similarly, for India, we show again their consumption possibilities line, and this has the same slope of 1.2, but which is smaller than the slope of their PPF, 1.67, and so it pivots out from the vertical axis where cloth is produced, since they specialize completely in cloth production. Consumption possibilities are now possible up to this line, which previously was not attainable under autarky production and consumption. The results for our specific illustration are summarized. This lecture has demonstrated the gains from trade in the Ricardian model. Though we have not included precisely preferences in order to pinpoint both pre- and post-trade specific consumption, yet we have shown through what is possible how countries mutually gain from trade. What drives this result is the fundamental difference across the two countries in their technologies. This is what makes labor more productive in one compared to the other. This productivity difference gives rise to a price differential across the two countries that is exploited to provide mutual gains from trade. The next steps involve making sure at this time you have fully read through Chapter 2, take the quiz associated with this lecture, and get ready for the next lecture, which both includes preferences within the Ricardian model, as well as extends the Ricardian model to explore the implications of dispensing with the labor theory of value by allowing for multiple factors.